All right, today we're taking a deep dive, literally, inside the human brain. We're going to explore its ventricular system. Now, this is a whole network of hidden, fluid-filled chambers. And trust me, it's not just empty space. It's this incredibly dynamic system that produces, circulates, and reabsorbs the cerebrospinal fluid that, keeps our brain protected and running smoothly.
So, when we say the hidden plumbing, what are we really talking about? Well, it's this series of connected cavities, the ventricular system, that makes and moves around cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. And this fluid is so important. It's like a liquid cushion that protects the brain from getting knocked around. But it also does so much more, like clearing out metabolic junk and keeping the whole chemical environment stable.
Okay, this diagram right here, this is going to be our map. We are going on a guided tour, following the exact path that cerebrospinal fluid takes on its journey, right from where it's made all the way through the entire system. So, let's get started. Our journey kicks off right here, in what are called the lateral ventricles. Think of these as the grand chambers of the system. They're the two biggest ones, and they're the main production sites for cerebrospinal fluid. So yeah, you could call them the system's main reservoirs.
Just look at the size of these things. There's one of these lateral ventricles located deep inside each half of the brain, each cerebral hemisphere. And that big, sweeping C shape, it actually follows the way the cerebrum itself develops, kind of wrapping around all these key structures deep inside the brain.
So, to recap, we've got their location deep inside the cerebral hemispheres, and of course, that signature C shape. But here's the really crucial part. The floor of these ventricles is lined with this special tissue called the choroid plexus. Now this is the factory, the structure that is actively pumping out the vast majority of the brain's cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, so you've got all this CSF being produced in two totally separate chambers. It has to have a way to flow into the rest of the system, right? So how does it get out of there? Well, the answer is this little thing called the interventricular foramen. It's a small but absolutely vital channel that lets the CSF drain from each lateral ventricle into the next chamber. And because it's so small, it's actually a really common spot for blockages, which, as you can imagine, can lead to a dangerous buildup of pressure. All right, so after passing through those little gateways, the CSF from both sides of the brain merges together into our second stop, the third ventricle. This is like the central hub of the whole system. And you can see its location really clearly here. The third ventricle is this single, super narrow cavity that's sitting right on the midline of the brain, perfectly positioned to collect all that CSF coming down from the two lateral ventricles above it. Anatomically, it really is just a thin, slit-like space, but its location is absolutely critical. Why? Because its walls are formed by some major players in the brain. You've got the thalamus on each side, that's the brain's sensory relay center, and the hypothalamus, which controls a ton of our automatic functions. This proximity means that if this ventricle swells up, it can directly press on and mess with these vital structures. So from this central hub, our CSF has to keep moving downward. The floor of the third ventricle actually tapers and narrows down into this thin canal, and that's what's going to carry the fluid right through the midbrain. It's called the Cerebral Aqueduct.
Now, this next stop on our tour isn't really a chamber, it's more of a canal. The cerebral aqueduct is this super narrow but totally essential link that connects the upper ventricles to the lower part of the system. Its path is pretty straightforward. It goes from the third ventricle, runs right through the midbrain, and then dumps into the fourth ventricle. But its narrowness, that's its biggest weakness. Just like that interventricular foramen we talked about, the cerebral aqueduct is another really common place for an obstruction, which can cause all that fluid to back up and lead to hydrocephalus.
And that brings us to the final chamber on our little tour, the fourth ventricle. Topographically speaking, we're now way down at the level of the brainstem and the cerebellum.
You can see exactly where it sits on our map right here. It's tucked it into this really critical space, right between the brainstem, which is in front of it, and the cerebellum, which is behind it. To get really precise, it's wedged between the pons and medulla part of the brainstem and the cerebellum. And this relationship is so key in a clinical setting because any tumors or swelling in this area can easily compress the fourth ventricle, blocking that CSF flow and really impacting the vital functions of the brainstem. Okay, so check this out. Our entire journey so far has been inside the brain, right? But the story's not quite over. How does the CSF get outside to actually surround and protect the brain and spinal cord? Well, it is time for the grand exit.
The roof of this fourth ventricle has 3 little openings, or apertures, that basically act as escape hatches. There's one in the middle, called the median aperture, and 2 on the sides, the lateral apertures.
And this is the final critical step in the whole process. These little openings allow the CSF to finally exit the ventricular system and flow into what's called the subarachnoid space. That's the area between the brain and the skull. From there, the CSF can circulate all around the surface of the brain and the spinal cord, giving it that essential cushion and chemical protection.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thought. This whole elegant, interconnected network, it's not just plumbing, it's literally a life support system. Its intricate design really highlights just how vulnerable our brain is, and it shows the incredible, complex mechanisms that have evolved to protect and nourish our most important organ. It's really just a beautiful design for a life-sustaining function.